This short video will show how to operationalize the case definitions for periodontitis by the American Academy of Periodontics and the Centers for Disease Control. To get started, let's go to the data analysis section and start a new project. We'll call this case definitions. And let's upload our data set from our computer. All right, now that we've uploaded the data sets, let's start by creating new variables that are a summary of all the site-specific measurements per tooth. I have already created these variables. For example, this variable means the maximum probing depth on tooth number 27. And the same thing for loss of attachment. This means the maximum loss of attachment on tooth number 27. But let me show you how that was created. You'll come to data processing and you'll come to arithmetic transformations and select statistical summary across variables. Once selected, you can then select the variables that you wish to summarize. This will be the tooth specific measurements. I can then trigger this drop-down menu and select my variables one by one. However, if I want to use a pattern, I can then use this filter menu and click on switch to pattern filtering. This allows me to type a pattern, for example 02LA, which means look across the entire data set and pull all the variables that have this substring in them. Once you hit comma, it then automatically pulls all the variables that have that specific string you have specified. What I can then do is click this box to select all of them and then hit done selecting. So now I have this setup where I have my variables here and I can choose to set a particular value to missing. In this case, this is important because in NHANES, sites that were not accessed were captured with the value 99. And so that represents a missing value. Obviously, we don't want to have a scenario where we're returning the maximum value as 99 when that value actually represents a missing value. And so this spares us the extra step of having to do some data cleaning before this step. Next, we have this option to assign as missing to rows with any missing value. This means, do we want the system to return a missing value if any of these variables have missing data? Well, the answer is no. We want the system to be very efficient and use whatever data it has. So we will not check this box. Let's leave it open so that the system can use any information available from the available variables. Next, we then enter the name of our variable that represents the summary, in this case the maximum of all 4 variables, and it's recommended to use a name that is descriptive that you will remember. So for example, I can say maximum loss of attachment on tooth number 2. So that way it's very descriptive for me to know what that variable represents. And then once I hit on that action button, it creates that variable for me. And now I have the variable at the very top of my data set here, maxLA02. It's a continuous variable. These are the unique values. It has 14 unique values and it has 7,792 missing values. I can click here to visualize the variable and click here to see the summary statistics. And so that's how we created the tooth-specific summaries taken across all the unique measurements for each tooth. Next, we would delete this variable since we don't need it, haven't created it before. And we'll go to the next step, which is creating a tally for the number of teeth that meets a particular cutoff. If you remember, the case definitions have statements like number of sites or number of teeth with maximum probing depth or maximum loss of attachment of 6 millimeters or higher, whatever the number is. So we need to create those tallies. To do that, we will come to data processing and come to arithmetic transformations and create those variables by clicking this button that says sum of items meeting condition. Again, remember we've already created those already in our data set, but I'm just walk you through an example to show how those were done. So I'll click this, and then it brings me to this interface where I can then select the variables that I wish to create a tally from. Click this. I can select my variables here if I wanted, or if I wish to use pattern recognition, I can come here again and click on switch to pattern filtering and then enter the pattern I'm interested in. For example, I want to pull all the variables that have the string max LA, which is maximum loss of attachment. And here it has pulled all 28 variables, which corresponds to all 28 teeth. And I can then simply check the button at the top, select all of them, and click on Done Selecting. The rule here is include variable in the count if its value is greater or equal to, for example, 6. So here what I'm saying is count the number of variables per individual where they have 6 millimeters or more of loss of attachment. So in each individual will return with a number that represents that count. If you have no tooth that meets that condition, the answer will be 0. If you have 60, the answer will be 6. And so that's how we created those variables. And here you can enter then the variable name, for example, number of teeth with 6 millimeters loss of attachment. And you click on transform. And the platform will then proceed to generate that variable for you. So that's how we created all those variables. Again, since I already have this, I will proceed to delete it from my data set. Now that we've created the variables we need, let's now proceed to create the variables indicating severe, moderate, mild, and any periodontitis. Let's first create the variable for severe periodontitis. To do that, we'll come to data processing and click on create composite variable. A composite is something made up of 2 or more things. So here we're trying to create a new variable made up of 2 or more variables. So we'll click this and we want to create that variable using conditions or rules. So let's click that. We can create this with the visual method or the classic method. Let's just start with the classic method to give you a feel for it, and then we'll use the visual method some other place. We then select the variables that make up the definition for severe periodontitis. In this case, we're interested in the summary across teeth for loss of attachment with 6 millimeters or more, which is this variable, as well as the summary variable that indicates the number of sites with probing depth of 5 millimeters or more, which is this variable. Those are the 2 variables we're interested in, and we'll click on Done Selecting. So let's create the first category, which is individuals with severe periodontitis. You are said to have severe periodontitis if you have at least 2 or more teeth where the maximum loss of attachment is 6 millimeters. So this is what this sentence means. If value of this variable, which is number of teeth with 6 millimeters loss of attachment, is greater or equal to 2, which simply means identify individuals who have 2 or more teeth with this large a loss of attachment, and if the number of sites, in this case we're interested in sites, not teeth, so we're using a variable for sites, is again greater or equal to 1. Based on the case definition, this is how we'll define severe periodontitis. And if those conditions are met, we want to assign a value of 1, which is the individual has severe periodontitis. So we will create that variable, and all other observations, we are just going to put them into a separate category minus missing values. So exclude missing values, and that will fall under other. So here we've created a variable where 1 stands for individuals with severe periodontitis. Then we have others, and then we have missing. We can check the sample sizes to see how many individuals belong in each category. And once we are satisfied, we can assign a variable name, for example, severe periodontitis and proceed. And now we have created our variable for severe periodontitis. All right, now let's go ahead and do the same thing for moderate periodontitis as well as any periodontitis and mild periodontitis. For moderate periodontitis, we will also go ahead and select the two variables that are indicated. The definition says 2 or more interproximal sites with loss of attachment that is 4 millimeters or more, not on the same tooth. So let's select that variable. We'll come to data processing, create composite variable using conditions. Let's use a visual method now so we can balance them up, so we can see how that works too. Here, the first variable we want to select is number of teeth with loss of attachment 4 millimeters or more. So we're going to select the variable for number of teeth with 4 millimeters or more of loss of attachment. We're going to select that. The second variable we're interested in is for probing depth. We want the number of teeth with 5 millimeters or more of probing depth, not on the same tooth. So we're looking for teeth indicators. So we're going to select this variable. Done selecting. So let's expand it so we can see both of them side by side. So for both cylinders, we need to cut at 2. Since the definition says 2 or more and 2 or more. So we'll click there to cut. We also click here at 2 to cut. So the relationship between the two is OR. So we're going to drag this and drop here and select OR, because that's what the case definition says. Now we would drag this to here because we've created that category. Can move our missing values here. And collapse them together, and then assign the other ones into a category of their own, so that now we have the indicator for moderate periodontitis. Then we have the individuals who do not report periodontitis. So let's go ahead and call this, edit the label to call this 1, and this one's 0. And we would proceed to conflict resolution to automatically check for conflict. But first, let's give it the name, moderate period. Now, we have created a variable for moderate periodontitis. But before we leave this variable, we must remember that this variable also includes individuals with severe periodontitis. So before we go ahead to create mild periodontitis, let's replace all the values of moderate periodontitis where individuals had a value of 1 for severe periodontitis, because they should not be in that same category. So let's come to data processing and let's come to find and replace. We can also access that directly beside the variable name here. Replace. And we want to replace a subset of individuals who report the value of 1 on severe periodontitis. So a value of severe periodontitis is exactly equal to 1. Then assign them a value of 0 in the variable for moderate periodontitis. So here we'll say enter the value to find individuals who reported a value of 1 for moderate periodontitis, but who actually should be assigned a value of 0 because they have already reported having severe periodontitis. So find 1 and replace with 0. Remember, the point is that we want the categories to be mutually exclusive. You can't have severe periodontitis and at the same time have moderate. You have the more serious condition. So if they already had severe, we want to replace their record of 1 as 0 so that the groups are mutually exclusive. So let's replace. And so we have finally completed our generation of the variable for moderate periodontitis now. Lastly, let's create the variable for mild periodontitis. Come to data processing once again. We come to create composite variable using conditions. Now, this particular variable is defined by 3 conditions. So we're going to select them. You have to have 2 or more interproximal sites with lots of attachments greater than or equal to 3 millimeters. So let's select that variable. We use the visual method. So select the variable that indicates lots of attachments in terms of sites, 3 millimeters or more. So this is the variable here. We'll select that. The next variable is for probing depth. That is number of teeth with probing depth of 4 millimeters or more, not on the same teeth. So we're looking for a tooth indicator. So this is it here. Teeth with probing depth of 4 millimeters, not on the same tooth. That's why we have a tooth indicator here, meaning that the unit of measurement is at the tooth. So we select that. And then we have a third variable, which is number of sites with probing depth of one number of sites with probing depth of 5 millimeters or more. So let's look for the third variable, site with probing depth of 5 millimeters, which is this one here. Now, for you to have mild periodontitis, you cannot have severe periodontitis and you cannot have moderate periodontitis. So let's select these 2 variables as well. Let's click on done selecting. Now, this is quite a lot of variables, so let's expand this so that we can see it very clearly. So for the first variable, which is loss of attachment 3 millimeters or more, number of sites, the cutoff here is 2, so we're going to select 2 and click on confirm, split them. The next one here, which is the number of teeth with probing depth of 4 millimeters or more, the cutoff here is 2, so we're going to select 2. For the third variable, the probing depth 5 millimeters or more, the case definition says exactly 1 site. So we're going to click on 1 and we will say treat this single number as its own group by checking this box. So let's implement the case definition now. The case definition says that you have this green and this, so we're going to drag this to this. The relationship is and then it says next that you have this newly created or this the exactly 1. So let's combine those 2 groups together. So we drag this here to exactly 1. The relationship is or. Next, for you to have mild periodontitis, you cannot have moderate and you cannot have severe. So we're going to drag this to 0 and the relationship is and finally we're going to drag this to the individuals who did not report severe periodontitis, and again the relationship is and. So that's how we define our mild periodontitis. So here we have finally created the individuals who have mild periodontitis. We can now drag this to this side and we can pull our missing values to this side carefully. And then all the other remaining observations we can then put them into one category. So let's clean this up. So we'll call this, let's edit the label, and we're going to call this 1, and we're going to call this 0. And proceed to conflict resolution. This will be called mild periodontitis. So now we've created our indicators for mild, moderate, and severe periodontitis. Let's now create a measure for any periodontitis, which means total periodontitis. So we'll come up here, data processing, create composite variable using conditions, and we'll select the 3 variables we need, which are mild, moderate, and severe periodontitis. Let's expand this so that we can see all our selections clearly. So if you reported 1 here, or you reported 1 here, or you reported 1 here, we're going to merge this into one group and say you have any periodontitis. So 1 or 1 or 1 means you have severe periodontitis. And all the others, we're going to just assign them into one category and exclude missing values. So this gives us a summary of variables of the variable for individuals who have any periodontitis, which means you have mild, moderate, or severe periodontitis. Let's edit this to call this a value of 1 and call this a value of 0. And we're going to call this any periodontitis. So we have all our variables created now. Any periodontitis, mild, moderate, severe, or let's make sure this is also a binary variable. For whatever reason, we did not create that as a binary. So let's recode it to be binary. So instead of calling it others, let's edit that label and give it a value of 0. And let's just simply replace the original variable. So now everything is binary: moderate, mild, any, and severe periodontitis. Now let's calculate our point estimates to compare with the MMWR. But we have to account for the complex survey design. So let's come to the analysis mode. It's currently unweighted. Let's change it to weighted by clicking this button here. And we're going to select the weight variable, which is this name, WTMEC 2 year. Select that. We'll select the PSU variable. Let's search for it. This is it here. We'll select the stratum variable. Let's search for it. This is it here. And save. And now our analysis are now in weighted mode, which means that every analysis we do at this point going forward will automatically account for the complex survey design. Now let's create our point estimates. Since those are estimates, we're going to come to the estimate section, come to prevalence, and select the outcome variables, which are severe, any, mild, and moderate. Done selecting. Our analysis are among a subset. So let's select the subset, which is people who are aged 30 years or older. So add the variable. This is the variable right here. So if value of age is greater or equal to 30, we can then estimate. So now we have our estimates calculated. We can also choose to let's go back to show how you can modify your preferences. If you want to change the number of decimal places to 2, or to change whether to display confidence intervals or standard error, you'd come to the preferences down here. Let's say I wanted to select to 2 decimal places. I will then click there. My reference group or subpopulation is still here, and click on estimate. And once that is done, I can then generate my estimates based on the specifications I've provided. And so this is how you set up the case definitions for periodontitis on the Chisquares platform and generate your point estimates accordingly.